watching the award-winning GHS-TV, Germantown Community Television, your hometown news and information station.
Welcome back. I'm Vincent Perryman, and you're watching LegalEase. Joining us on our show is attorney Thomas Greer of Bailey & Greer. We are discussing the civil justice system. Thomas, before the break, we basically broke down how our civil courts work in Tennessee, and then it kind of compared them a little bit with other jurisdictions and all. Now, every year and every election cycle, we always hear about how judges should be reformed or the judicial system should be reformed. What are some things that are pending in Nashville that affect our viewers' rights as far as in civil suits?
Okay. There are several bills that I'm aware of that are sort of making their way through the legislative process, dealing with the civil justice system and dealing directly with the citizens of Tennessee's rights. So some of the proposals in these bills would be to place an arbitrary cap on damages in certain types of lawsuits. So lawsuits against hospitals or doctors, the government would seek to impose an arbitrary cap. There's some changes to what's called venue statute. So where can you bring a lawsuit? That's one of the issues that's coming up. There's another issue that's going through the legislature on punitive damages. So punitive damages are very rare, but they are reserved for the most egregious cases to punish a wrongdoer. So if someone acts intentionally or fraudulently or maliciously, there are efforts to curb those types of awards. And I believe there is some discussion over how our judges, particularly our appellate judges, are elected or appointed. Mm-hmm. I think there are some bills currently that are kind of in the works right now on that.
Yeah. Now, as far as we've gone through in the first segment as to how we've got all these checks and balances already within the courtroom. Now, does any of this pending legislation really reduce any frivolous lawsuits or anything like that?
Right. You hear a lot of talk about frivolous lawsuits. If you're talking about an effort to put an arbitrary cap on damages, that has nothing to do with the filing of a lawsuit. You can go out and file a frivolous lawsuit and your damages are capped. Well, by definition, a frivolous lawsuit is not a lawsuit that's going to get a big verdict or an excess verdict. It's frivolous. Mm-hmm. The judge is going to throw it out. So placing a cap on damages has nothing whatsoever to do with curbing frivolous lawsuits. In fact, if anything, placing a cap on damages affects someone with a meritorious lawsuit. Someone with serious injuries with a real case, if you place a cap on the amount of money they can collect, that's what it affects, not frivolous lawsuits.
Mm-hmm. And then we've got all of this where, a lot of times when I listen to somebody stumping for getting elected, it's easy to beat up on the attorneys, mm-hmm. Because we're not likable guys or whatever. Who knows? But with all of this, I mean, what are the effects as far as with any of this legislation that's sitting out there? I mean, I guess there's got to be some value to it if they're pushing it through.
Well,
so.
That maybe I'm the wrong person to ask that to. Some things that have been thrown out is this is why we're passing these bills. You mentioned frivolous lawsuits. Mm-hmm. Cap and damages doesn't have anything to do with that. There are efforts that have been made in the past to reduce the number of lawsuits that are effective. In 2008, the General Assembly and the governor signed it, a bill placing some restrictions on lawsuits against doctors and hospitals. So before you can sue a doctor or hospital, you have to have a signed affidavit from another doctor basically testifying this is a case. Mm-hmm. You also have to give pre-suit notice. That passed in 2008, and the result is, over the past 3 years, a 44% reduction in lawsuits against doctors and hospitals. There was a reduction in the amount of premiums that doctors have to pay as a result of that bill. So the proponents of that bill would say we have reduced frivolous lawsuits, and there's evidence to support that. If you're talking about placing arbitrary caps on damages, I've not seen any kind of empirical data to say this is why we're going to do it. It's going to increase. It's going to help with health care. It's going to, there's no support for it.
Mm-hmm. Now, as far as on some of the stuff that's pending here, I would think someone might say an argument for a cap would be to avoid a runaway jury.
Right. I missed that one. That is what some of the proponents of the bill say. In fact, Tennessee has not really had that problem. The past 5 years, the number of $1 million verdicts has been virtually unchanged. And I would suggest that the reason is all the things we've already talked about. Mm-hmm. The fact that we have to have a unanimous jury, the fact that there's a judge there to reduce the award if it's too high, the fact that a judge can grant a new trial if he or she doesn't agree with it. And if you hear about runaway juries, I think your listeners need to know who are the people on your juries. They're your neighbors, they're your teachers, they're your people you go to Sunday school with, they are co-workers, small business owners. They're people in your community who have listened to a set of facts, and all 12 of them have agreed, and that's a very hard thing to do. Get 12 people, 12 strangers to agree on anything, and that's very difficult. So with those protections in mind, Tennessee really hasn't seen this, these outlandish verdicts.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's see, what was it? On one of these, I've seen a bill that's floating out there to create the nursing home neglect cases to be treated as medical malpractice. Mm-hmm. Realistically, and I'm being told I'm going to have to wait till the next segment for that question. So when we return from our break, we'll talk more with Thomas Greer about the civil justice system. Please stay with us.